I think one of the interesting things to me that was raised at Tolbert at the beginning was that idea of trying to compare this divide now to the idea of literacy from a policy perspective. You can imagine back in, say, the 1850s when literacy was an issue, and there would be some people who would really want the masses to be educated, to be able to read, would see it as the part of the role of government to make that happen. Schools, you could also imagine there'd be a group of people that actually benefit by not having the entire populace literate and being able to more or less control things by not doing that. In some ways, I think you're going to see a similar kind of thing, and it's not a left or right issue, but you're going to see people now. How many of you could imagine not having the internet for a month? How many people could imagine that, not having access to the internet for a month? How many people don't have a Facebook page? Okay, we got one Luddite. Okay, how many people have never tweeted? Okay, so that one's a little bit different. How many people have a LinkedIn page? Okay, how many people have a smartphone of some sort, iPhone, BlackBerry, or something that you can actually pick up the internet with you? Okay, imagine I'm getting my iPad in about 2 weeks, which I think in about 3 years is going to actually change the world. But literally, I think it's students, you all will be walking around with something like an iPad in a few years and won't have textbooks anymore. I mean, I think there's so many changes that are going to come with that. But can you imagine then, again, that divide that's going to be coming up and what the policy implications are for how much we intervene and whether we intervene? So I think this is really an interesting policy question that on the surface of it doesn't always have policy implications, but I think the discussion has really brought that forward. Not just the politics side, but what do we do about that? And what do we do, what are the implications for people that don't have that, and is there a role for government to make that happen? So the question has to do with whether the Democrats actually have the market, if you will, on fundraising through social marketing and other kinds of online access and electronic means.
No. Actually, we were just sidebar talking about how Republicans had more money, and then the Democrats in this last election cycle have swung over to have more money, and I do believe it'll swing back the other direction. There was actually a lot of money raised on the Republican side this last election cycle as well, across all types of elections, and I just think it's a matter of people being educated on how to use it and using it appropriately. What you're going to find is bigger challenges related to ethics to be able to prove that it wasn't bigger groups of people giving money to people to contribute online. There's still some question on the ethics of all of that and whether or not it was truly individual donors or maybe somebody giving money to people to donate. And when you have to give it in person and you have a check number, it's easier to follow than sometimes the online. And so that's kind of where we are now. And then now with the change in corporate contributions that just happened at the federal level, and the federal Supreme Court says now that that corporations can contribute now to, and that was a First Amendment right. With that happening, you're going to see a whole different shift to this next cycle. So I don't think I would base, because elections are every 2 to 4 years, I think the changes are coming so fast that the next one will be different. I'm just pretty sure about that.
I think I don't think that state legislative races have gotten really into the individual campaign internet contribution market nearly as much, and I think it's the presidential candidates. Everybody knows about them. Everybody's got an opinion on it. You feel those issues very strongly. That's a different thing. I would think, though, just talking off the top of my head, and I don't know anything, but maybe you could confirm it, Kent Sorensen, who's running for the state Senate as a Republican, and he has a very strong ideological identity. And he's on the blogs, he's on the Steve Day show, and whatever, 1040. And I think a lot of conservatives across the state of Iowa know Kent Sorensen. And I think he could probably raise money over the internet and do fairly, the small dollar stuff that we were talking about. There's probably, I'm trying to think of a Democrat that could do that. I'm not quite as sure. But you have to have the right profile.
I think I'd also add to that in Scott Brown's campaign in Massachusetts. He did a tremendous amount of work on Twitter just in like about a week's time, he raised over $500,000 just by having people tweeting and putting his website on there, and people were going to that to donate to him. So I mean, I think that, you know, we have just literally scratched the surface on this. So is there an inequity? No. If there's anything, there was probably an inequity in how the media was used, but I think everybody's catching up with one another.
So the question had to do with, there was a lot of use of social networking to reach young voters, and will that have to continue, or could they go back to playing to older folks, I guess, who are more likely to vote and maybe aren't as savvy technologically?
Well, I'd like to throw out an anecdote that I think you might find, this crowd might find interesting. I was talking to some downtown business people this afternoon around lunchtime, and they were all kind of mocking this Facebook site that had been set up saying, I will go to the Iowa City Council meeting on the 21 issue. And there were like 1,151 people that RSVP'd and 40 showed up. So these aren't people that are necessarily real savvy, but I think the message they were taking away from that is Facebook is all talk and no action. So, you know, for every example like the Obama campaign, I think there's things like this that where something looks a little bigger than advertised too. So I don't know.
I have a historical perspective on that because, I mean, I go back to the first presidential campaign I worked in was in 1972. And believe it or not, it was from a governor, if you can tell about it. Anyway, but I think that, you know, students have always been a part of it. I think your generation, and to your credit, you are more informed than we ever were. And it's just because you have the ability to be more informed. And you take the time to look up the issues, and you have it there in front of you. So I think that youth vote is probably, yeah, very important in future elections, and the candidate that chooses not to pay attention to it does so at their peril.
But the youth vote was actually, even in the Obama campaign in 2008, it was disappointing. I mean, it wasn't the turnout that they expected. So I think turnout was it 63% of the voter eligible population in the 2008 election? And that was the highest turnout since 1960.
50 something.
I think it was 68. But turnout of the young, that group 18 to 25 was still low. Was still the lowest. And there's a lot of obvious barriers. And so if we had internet voting, you can imagine. If we had internet voting, I think turnout would be higher. But so I think that the Obama campaign was innovative in lots of uses of the internet, and I hope we see that more. But there's more that needs to happen, I think, to translate the communication into the kind of turnout rates for the young that would really, as you say, get them the representation that they need. The turnout in the caucus, we have great data. We have the best data on the caucuses because we're polling all these caucus participants. And the caucuses, the Iowa caucuses in 2008, did have more, 50% of all caucus attenders in 2008 were first-timers. Can you believe that? And the percentage of young and low-educated and relatively lower on the income scale was the least biased participation that we've ever seen. But do you know what percentage of Iowans caucused in 2008? Just take a guess. 6%. And those 6%, that's it. That's who will actually go out to caucuses.
When you say least biased, you mean more young people came to caucus?
Compared to earlier caucuses, it was the least skewed by what we call socioeconomic status. So skewed, that means usually who would caucus is going to be the most party, the people who are the most party activists. So those are going to be strong partisans, both Republican, Democrat, and they tend to be older, wealthier, educated. And so this caucus in 2008 did have less of all of those, you understand, less of those skews.
Biases, so it's more representative of what people really were.
But still 6%. Those are the caucuses, though. Yeah.
And if you were to look at my race, in my district, I had 11 precincts, and this is in the Obama year, and I needed to win 6 in order to win, and the 6 that I targeted, I won 5, and the 6 that he targeted, he won 5, and we split the 6th, and that made the 13 vote difference. And although there was a little bit greater turnout, I could still tell you exactly which ones would be the low turnout precincts, which ones would be the high turnout precincts. And the change is, yes, people turned out in 2008, but there was an election, there's elections after that, and then nobody came back again. And so, as far as, you guys have heard of return on investment, right? So if you're going to work as a candidate, me, and go out and work really hard to find voters, I'm going to go to the people that vote because they vote. And if I miss all of them and I go out and spend all my time on college campuses and they don't turn out to vote, then have I really used my time well on return on investment? So in order for you to be taken seriously moving forward, you have to turn out to vote. And like he said, I went to an event, I was asked to MC an event, and I can speak to your event about the Iowa City race, or the Iowa City meeting that nobody showed up to. I was asked to MC an event up in Waterloo for, it was Memorial Day, Labor Day, something. And online, on Facebook, all these hundreds of people were going to come out, right? I get there, and there are 10. I drive to Waterloo. I'm not from Waterloo. I get there. It's pretty much the organizer, the 2 people that put up all this stuff on Facebook, a couple people that were supposed to speak, one who was singing and whatever, and that's it. That's it. And so did that equate to whoever said they were coming versus who showed up? No. So there's got to be a balance in that. And I'm afraid that we're going to start seeing, you probably see a lot of people very much campaigning by Facebook. That means they're not actually getting out of their house and actually going to do the hard work, and they're sitting behind their computer and campaigning. They're not going to win because it takes a lot of work to win an election. And so I think it's going to swing back the other way here pretty soon because people are doing one and not the other.
Isn't part of it having to do with like the cable companies and others? Are you talking, like Chicago, I know, had wanted their first line of defense was they wanted citywide Wi-Fi, and A, it was not affordable, and B, they were running into resistance from contracts with private. Can you guys fill in? And so what's happened is that MacArthur Foundation paid for 5 low-income neighborhoods to be wireless as an experiment, and then they're evaluating in about 3 years to try to see if they can see actual changes in, say, unemployment rates and et cetera, and see if the Wi-Fi made a difference.
In Cedar Rapids, we were working on wireless in Cedar Rapids, and then we had a flood, and all the wires were underground. So it really messed up that whole plan. And so as far as moving forward with that, I'm not really sure. But Cedar Rapids had tried, and then there was also a lot of interference among the buildings downtown themselves. And so even though you were in a wireless zone, somehow the building materials were inhibiting the actual signal. So I'm not really sure what happened with that, but Cedar Rapids was supposedly citywide for a while, but it isn't.
Question is whether new media has created more transparency for the legislative issues.
Yes, I think so. One of the things I like to do on Facebook and on Twitter is if a debate's coming up where I've had a lot of feedback on it, I will go and put online the bill number and then where they can go listen live. Because in both of our chambers, even though we don't have video access, we do have audio access whenever we're in session. And so believe it or not, there are people at home that actually listen in to debate and listen to and what's interesting is now, I don't know if you've ever done this before, but if you're listening to debate online in the House, if the House goes to recess or if we go at ease or take a break, the audio just cuts off dead and nobody on the other end that's sitting at home knows what happens. So what happens is I usually leave my Facebook page open, and what happened is all these instant messages pop in. Where'd you go? Where'd everybody go? We were just listening to you and now you're gone, and all of that kind of thing. And so we still don't really have the best opportunity for people back home. The other complaints we hear on the Sunshine Law issue is the issue of caucuses, and you guys know what a caucus is? I mean, we talked about it before about caucus, but in the legislative sense, you have a House Republican caucus, you have a Senate Republican caucus. any group of people that get together like-minded can be called the caucus, but we have one, and those are closed off to the public. And so people will complain that backroom deals are being made and those types of things, and those are still not online and still not open to the public. And so that may be part of those concerns. But yes, I mean, the fact that you can search bills, one of the things I like to do, because I wasn't a politician and wasn't somebody that enjoyed this before, is teaching people how to make sure they can have access. And that's one of the things I like to do the best with my job.
Yeah, the caucuses are not available, but if you intern with the Senate Democratic staff, you can attend the Democratic caucuses, which is a good thing. We passed legislation this year on tax credit reform, and some people wanted to do a lot more with it, but one of the things they did was an accountability thing. They're going to put information on the web of who's getting this tax credit, and that means you're actually spending money, where it's like money we're not collecting. So it's money that's not going to the state in exchange for this business doing something. Sometimes they even write them a check. Anyway, that information will be online, and then groups, probably groups in Iowa City, can more easily look at it and analyze it. So that's a more, another level. You got your ordinary citizen, but then there's particular special interest groups. I know campaign donations, those are being analyzed by good government groups. And the more of that goes online, and we're always kind of slowly adding a little bit more. The problem with the legislature is these are the guys who got elected under the current system. Why do they want to change it? So that's a perennial argument.
The question as to not just more information, but the actual quality, considering a lot of these issues take a lot of time and characters to actually say what's going on.
I know for me, I would hope that it, when I tweet, it would just pique somebody's interest. I hope they'll call me. For one thing, these big fat fingers, I can't type worth a damn, so I'm much better off on a telephone than at a keyboard. But I just hope it will get them to make contact with me.
But as they were just saying that because of all the consolidations with radio and television and not having coverage anymore of local politics, and even our local newspapers don't have local stories anymore. And then if you go to CNN or any of these stations, you're basically getting news in little sound bites that I just feel like the whole world of the internet provides so much more political information. I mean, every form compared to the television and very weak mass media coverage that we have of politics.
And when I tweet, it usually has a link to whatever the source is for more information. And so you're really doing a disservice if I just put my opinion on something and not put out there. But my goal is not to tell you my opinion on a subject. It is to link you to whatever it is that you need to make your own decision. And hopefully that makes you more informed. And so then the people that choose to follow me like that or dislike it or whatever, but they pick what they want to know. But you're right, if you only read the sound bites, yeah, you can spin it however you want to spin it. We can talk about, now that I've been there for 2 years, I can tell you, like, I voted on a bill related to flood recovery. Flood recovery was a piece of a bill, but then there were these pork projects all over the state, so I can call it pork when somebody else is calling it flood recovery. And same bill, one vote one way, one vote the other, and I can say this and they say that. And so that you definitely have to be more astute in your research. You can't just take it for face value because you saw it on Twitter, I would hope, and vote that way. That would be not very good.
So, something that we hear all the time whenever we talk about with people about you're trying something new, it's always, well, people that's not good enough. That they always treat it as that's alone. That's the only way you're going to communicate. It's not. There's going to be many, many different ways to communicate, and is intimidating to some of us who grew up with 3 network TV stations and major newspapers, and that was it. If you could get in there, I had a job. For 5 years, I just wrote down everything that these 3 network news shows did and made that available online, and that was a wonderful resource. And it'd be worth not much now because there's so many different things. When a topic somebody mentioned earlier, and this is something that stuck with me at a conference of legislative communicators, both partisan and nonpartisan, and they were talking about trying to raise money, and I don't think this went anywhere, but trying to get the states to the argument was that if you don't have paid effort behind you, if you're not paying to get your message out, you're invisible, or even worse, you're defined by other people. Well, what's the key thing about legislators? What are we promoting? What's our business? It's representative democracy. And if no one is talking about that and the give and the take and how a democracy works, then you're just defined by everybody else. And if you think about who you see, and particularly entertainment media, what are politicians like in the entertainment media? Or what are they like just in terms of the national news? It's just the national guys shouting back and forth at each other. And so the way it really works in the state legislature, which is a bunch of different people who have a lot of different opinions coming together and trading off different ballots, you know, it's that's kind of thing. The argument is that we're going to be just drowned in all this other information. And I really do think that is a serious problem. And then when the campaigns come around, you do have a lot of money. You might have $100,000, $200,000, but it's based on just pushing one message, usually negative, about the other person, which doesn't help the institution either. So there's another way that you learn about politics is just this back and forth nastiness. And whatever, we're like, how's this going to work out? I don't know.
So has more information, more transparency made it more difficult to have bipartisanship and actually create more divide?
There's a famous law professor at the Cass Sunstein, and his big argument about the world of the internet was that it was going to allow people to select the media that they wanted. So you watch Fox News if you're a conservative, you watch CNN if you're a Democrat, you go to rightmarch.org if you're a conservative, you go to truthout.org if you're a Democrat. And his argument was that we can select the kind of media that is consistent with our ideologies and not be exposed to what the other side says, and that it can create this increased polarization. Is that what you're talking about? So then you might look up some of the stuff by Cass Sunstein, because that was one of the arguments he's made for a long time. I don't know if that's the truth, but it used to be you'd have to read a newspaper and it would present both sides of the argument, remember? That's why the advertisers would pay to put their ads in the newspaper, because it was the idea that both sides were represented.
So can the internet actually help you see both sides more than physical newspapers?
As a legislator, yes. So if my district in Cedar Rapids on the northeast side is a third, and a third. On just about, you pick the issue, whether it's a fiscal issue or a social issue, it's about a third, and a third. And so, being Democrat, Republican, Independent, okay, didn't fill that in, sorry, but they're all about the same. And so I have three pretty distinct positions on most things. And so, yeah, that is very helpful to me, because if I see an article about whatever and we're going to be voting on it, I can link it to the next piece to try to get the whatever other viewpoint to be able to have a balanced opinion. Now, that does require some work on the part of the legislator, and I don't know, I can't speak to other people if they do that or not, but I find it very useful to be able to link it. And if you ever look at my Twitter account, I mean, I have Obama on mine, and I'm got the White House on there, and lots of different people on purpose so that I can see exactly what they're saying, because it doesn't make any sense to me why Rush gets all mad about something if I haven't heard the other side of it. If you only see one side of the story, you're not sure why Glenn Beck's mad about this if you didn't see the other. And so my Twitter page is pretty eclectic, and but that's because I like to see it more well-rounded.
The question, given the barriers because of the technology and the skills, are we moving towards everybody using their TV, or will there be something else that will actually bring that into the home?
So you want my little take on this? Because I actually think that we're not, that the internet's not going into the TV, but that we're going to get rid of our TVs, and the TVs are going into the internet. So how many of you have heard of like iSoftware TV and
Hulu.
What? Hulu. Well, Hulu, all of this. But have you heard of iSoftware TV and all of these things now, where you can you pay like $40 and you can pick up the television stations, like 400 television stations around the world? I'm not sure exactly where it's at, but and we're actually trying to get an adapter right now. We don't have any cable at our house. We haven't had any cable for 15 years because we don't want to pay for it. And so we're interested in making our TV, our internet hook into our television to try to present it. I don't know, but I just think I gave a talk in the communications department maybe a month ago, and that was kind of the question that we were asking about, which is how is television and the internet how are they going to come together? Is the internet going to go into the TV, or is the TV and the high prices we pay for Mediacom and the other cable companies going to become obsolete if we can get increasing amounts of this kind of information through the internet? You were talking about running your ads and saving $3,500. She was just talking about, and I loved it remember when we almost didn't get to see the football game, the Orange Bowl, because they were in that big argument about whether or not they were going to cover Iowa City was going to get coverage, and then everybody should have dropped Mediacom for sure.
How many people watch Netflix through an Xbox, through their TV? How many watch movies not, physically, but through a TV electronically in some way? It's almost half.
Is there any data on how much money we saved by switching to e-government?
Switching to what?
How much money is saved by switching to e-government?
E-government, there's actually been lots of good scholarly studies on e-government, because think about it, before, if you wanted a hunting license, if you wanted a license to be able to do all sorts of things where businesses interface with government or individuals, you'd have to go see a person who you'd have to talk to in person and pay a fee and fill out a form, and a lot of these transactions are all online. We're filing our taxes online.
I can tell you, in Johnson County, our treasurer's office has 10 less employees than it did in 1980. And the sole reason for that is people can pay taxes, renew license plates, that sort of thing online. That's why.
I have an interesting story for you. One of the things I find fascinating now are the different state capitals buildings. I really find them fascinating. But I was up in Wisconsin, and the House and the Senate are not the same. The House is gone electronic, and everybody has laptops on their desks. But the Senate has one of the longest-serving Senate presidents in the country, and he refuses to go electronic, so they have to do everything by paper. And so part of what we're facing with here is just the generational divide, in addition to what she's talking about, the electronic divide, but there's a generational gap between folks who even want to know how to type or text or anything like that. And so as the generation changes, I know that sounds just horrible, but it's really true. And if you ask the folks in Wisconsin why the Senate's using paper and their desks are stacked this high, it's all because President so-and-so has been in office for 53 years or something, and he doesn't want to use a computer. So that's just strange. But that's the way some of the decisions are made. There's a lot of tradition in government. And it's, we can't change this because that's the way it's always been done. But you should be happy. If you think about courts, the federal courts now, if they try to file something on paper, the attorneys have to pay a fine. They now have to do everything electronic, federal. Now, that did not mean that the state has figured that out yet, and we had big debates this year about why can't our courts go paperless like the federal courts have, and it's coming. But things like that moving, that's one of the good things about Obama in office. Him pushing those kind of things at the national level will actually help us in Iowa switch over.
With the future of actual voting online and other forms of democracy, direct democracy.
Yeah. Well, a lot of, we had remote internet voting for all of military personnel and everybody who is a citizen who was overseas in the 2008 election successfully, and that was a fair amount because there's a lot of troops deployed in Afghanistan and Iraq right now. So the technology is there, and those votes were counted, and it was considered secure. But they did some big studies. I think it was in 2008, of the feasibility of widespread remote internet voting, and I think they were worried that they were just worried that the technology is not. And I know we do all of our banking online, and I know that all of the I know that the World Bank and all of these things that cost a lot and matter a lot. So, but it doesn't sound like Obama's talking about that, huh?
Well, one of the big issues I know is proprietary access. There's a professor here by the name of Doug Jones that's an expert in this area, and if you're really interested, nobody knows as much about this as him. But one of the things they ran into is that Diebold and ESS and the companies that actually make the equipment that you go cast a vote on, didn't want to share how you get that information out of the machine with the government. They wanted it to be proprietary. Well, then there's no check. So all of a sudden you've got a private company that's in charge of our most sacred, maybe, right. And don't you want the government to be in charge of that rather than a private company? And so they could never agree.
We do have online voter registration, I think, in almost all places. And then we have, we can request online absentee ballots. There's a lot of movement. There's movement that way. And of course, a third of Americans voted early, in the 2008 election, and in 2010, this is going to be even more. And that's also changing so much.
The interesting thing in Iowa, we had to go back to a paper certification of ballots. We had purchased all of these electronic machines, the tally machines where you could push the buttons at the poll, and a whole lot of people pitched a big fit that they didn't leave a paper trail. You guys remember all that? The hanging Chad stuff in Florida and the big lawsuits with Gore, the whole thing. Well, because we didn't have a paper trail, we actually had to replace all of the more current forms throughout the state of Iowa. We've actually had to make laws to go backwards to put the paper ballot system back in so people could have a paper trail. So on the one hand, we're talking about, it's like this push-pull of what's going on in technology right now. Because on the one hand, people are saying, we need to go more electronic, and on the other hand, then they want the paper trail, which makes no sense. And so we're speaking out of two sides, but that really is it's an urban-rural divide in Iowa, more so than it really is a party divide. It's people with access and not access, and people want to be able to say that if, because machines break down, I tell you, and I can speak to this issue because my election was 13 votes. I had the recount. I was the last freshman in the class elected officially because it took an extra month to get there. And they were fighting about whether or not to count them by hand or by electronics. The electronics were more precise every single time, and they had lots of data to prove it, but there's still people out there saying if you don't count it by hand, it's not a real election. And so even though we'd have to do it simultaneously together, and that the machine would be more accurate than the hand count every single time, but yet we're still pushing paper. So I don't really get that. It's very frustrating for somebody like me and like you who see the other side of it, like banking and everything else. I don't get it. I can get my check all over the world, but something's just different about this. And I think it's about the right to vote. I think they just want to make sure nobody's disenfranchised, is what I think it's about.
Well, in some of it's also the opposite. In terms of making it too easy to vote, there's people that also don't want to make it too easy. Right? Well, there has to be some sort of effort that has to be put in, and somebody has to really want to and has to try. When we first made even voter registration easier, there was a lot of resistance in the state to making voter registration much easier for people because they were, some people would register that weren't registered before that would potentially benefit one party or the other. And so you run into a lot of control issues, I think, with a lot of these things too. And perceived control. You really don't really go to one side perceives a benefit.
If we had internet voting, though, I can promise you that the youth turnout right here, the youth turnout would really, it would be high. There's no doubt.
Which some people may not want.
That's true.
So the issue is, will this electronic divide go away as generational change occurs?
Right, that's what they thought, and the data's now been showing for a number of years this leveling off so if you ask what percentage of Americans have ever used the internet, it's up to like 77%. So yes, ever used, like have clicked on, but have you asked that question about do you have regular, effective, fast use, that broadband, that 60%, it's just flat. And the Pew Internet and American Life has been tracking this, and it's flat because of those cost issues, skill and cost issues. So, you have interesting questions, especially about Latinos, maybe some of the barriers there, but with increasing language acquisition and wealth as you go on. But I'm just telling you that that number has been kind of hovering.
Okay. Go ahead.
Well, I would just say I'm more concerned about a divide between people who give a crap about government and people who don't. I think that we run the risk because there's so much out there, but the filters are so broad and everything. I just think that we run the risk of having just people who don't care. People who have no idea who the mayor of their town is and don't care. And I think that's more scary, frankly, than who can get on the internet or who can't. I'm more concerned about people just being involved.
I think the opposite part of that is the people who don't care, and then there's people who care an awful lot, right? The base situation. And so these people are having different levels of influence, maybe like none or a lot. But you got to remember, eventually they come down to passing legislation that actually impacts people. So it's not just all arguing. It's going to come down to how good your local school is, or what you're allowed to do when you're driving. And it'll be interesting as groups, interest groups, and special, or not, whatever, people who believe, who are hardcore, can get together and talk and decide they know what's right. And maybe that's not what's good for the majority. And so the politicians, and you see this now nationally, which way to go with that? Is it repeal health care reform right now, or is it repeal and fix? They're trying to balance that, and will that message work with people who feel like it's really bad?
I'll just share one story about that. One of the big issues this year, how many heard about our law on texting while driving? Okay. How many heard that it started out being an adult law, and then it went to a kids graduated driver's license law, and then it went back to a partial adult law, and everybody is mad about the final outcome? The reason, let me tell you the reason that we are where we are with that bill. A lot of trucking companies and a lot of industry rely on input and being able to read text messages as part of their jobs. We've become so advanced in electronics that a lot of them get their routing information and their dock information on deliveries and transport via text message. And so part of the big battle became about industry and economy and all of those kind of things. And so what's really weird about our current law, the way it finally shook out, is that these trucking companies and the trucks that are the really big trucks now can still read and send text when they need to within this window of work-related whatever. But there's some federal guidelines coming down and whatever. But that's a really, and I thought originally that there would be a generational divide on who wanted to text and who did not. And that is not the case. We busted that theory the first time I went after it. Because I thought, well, all of us that are younger will want to be able to text. And all of us that are older don't even know what texting is, therefore voted against it. And that wasn't the case. And so it was all over the map. But that's exactly what he's talking about one of the issues that, you come at it from a lot of different directions. In the end, you try to do the best thing for Iowa. But, and it's totally about the electronic divide.
Okay, with that, I'd like to ask each of you, is there since this is a policy class, if there was one policy change that you would like to see made related to new media, is there anything in particular that you think would be important?
Policy change related to
It's a little tougher on this one because
I'm for some reason I'm blanking on this. What is the policy about the open network? So anyone has to carry anyone else's information. So Mediacom.
Net neutrality.
Net neutrality. Yes, that's it. You guys have talked about that, right? No? Well, net neutrality. So Mediacom cannot make you pay more to get information from Fox News, right? If you're connected on the media on their internet service, if you're getting information from the Fox News website, Mediacom cannot make you pay more. They can't make it slower, and boost some other network that they like. They have to be neutral. They're just the carrier, and that's an issue. And I think when you think about those poor areas or whatever, people don't have enough money, I could see somebody coming up with some kind of a commercially supported network where they would direct you certain ways, and they make that available to you for free. So you sort of have the internet, but you really don't. And that would be a big disadvantage for a lot of the people we're doing, because we're not paying people to come to our site. We're providing information and hope it's useful, as well as a lot of political people. So net neutrality, that would be key.
Anyone else have any policy changes?
I would agree.
Well, we talk in my election reform class, and many of you guys have been in that class, so I thank all of them who are here. We talk about the idea, many European countries have what's called free airtime for ballot qualified candidates. So candidates who actually make the threshold of being able to get through the primaries and get in the general, that the television stations are regulated and have to provide time for each candidate. And what that would do is it would cut the need for money in politics way out. Because right now, especially in national politics, all of the special interests and all the PACs give so much money to the Congress and the presidency, and those candidates cannot run their elections without all of that money. And if we want to get rid of some of the money in politics and what I consider some of the corruption in politics, one of the ways is to allow candidates to access the people, and the media is one of them. Now, if the internet makes the television less important, which you are both suggesting. This is a really savvy panel. I feel really fortunate to be here today and listen and learn from them. Then maybe the problem will solve itself with the internet. But the internet really has major potential, I think, for a lot of things, including money and politics.
Well, I'm really excited that that is your theory, because I know, being in Cedar Rapids media market, that the most expensive part of my campaign was television. My house race, I don't know how much you'd guess it would be worth, but my house race itself was over $600,000 for one house race in 2008. That's a house race. So when she talks about special interest groups and all of that just at the national level, no, it's at our level too. And so we'll have ads on television that we don't know who sponsored them, saying whatever about us, true, false, or indifferent. And my face was side by side with George W. for a while on TV, and I've never met him, but we were side by side. And just fascinating what happens in that whole thing. And so a balanced and fair playing field for media market would be huge toward campaign finance reform. And I'm not sure that you wouldn't have incumbents like me more than willing to push legislation in that direction, because none of us want to raise the $500,000 to blow it all on the media market in the first place.
It hurts everybody.
It hurts everybody.
And the only person it gains is all the media companies.
Yeah, and a lot of the media companies are not local. And that's even worse, is when all our money is going, we raise it local and then send it out to other people for the job.
One of the other issues that has come up years and years and years, or for the past few years, is particularly when it comes to financing. And one of the things that's been pushed for is real-time reporting. Today is a cutoff day for fundraising. Whatever you raised in the last quarter, you have to put a report together and it'll be filed online. You won't know who gave you a check in January until that report's filed in about 10 days. But one of the things that they have talked a lot about in campaign finance reform is real-time reporting. When I write that check to Renee, she puts it online and it's right there. And they say that, you know, Karen Fesler wrote a check to Renee Schulte for $100.
Thank you.